Okay, so are you ready to talk bread? Because today we are diving deep into the world of homemade bread. Like, seriously diving deep. We've got some amazing sources lined up, and trust me, they are packed with everything you need to know.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how something that seems so simple on the surface, flour, water, yeast, can actually be so complex.
It's like alchemy, turning those basic ingredients into a beautiful loaf of bread.
It really is, and your sources really highlight that. It's not just about combining ingredients, it's about understanding the science behind it, the interactions, the transformations that occur along the way.
Okay, so let's talk about those transformations because one ingredient in particular seems to be the star of the show, yeast. That little packet of magic.
Absolutely. Yeast is key.
Yeah.
And your source emphasizes the importance of activating it correctly. It's like waking up those little yeast cells and giving them a little pre-workout snack before we put them to work.
Warm water, a touch of sugar. Right.
Exactly. You're creating the perfect environment for them to thrive. But here's the thing. You have to be careful with the temperature.
Yeah, too hot and you kill the yeast. Too cold and they won't activate properly. It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Precisely. Your source actually uses the analogy of Goldilocks.
Yeah.
Not too hot, not too cold, just right. And that precision is something that comes up again and again in bread making.
It's a delicate dance between art and science for sure.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've activated our yeast. It's bubbly and happy, ready to work its magic. What's next? The part that always makes me a little nervous, kneading.
Kneading. Many people see it as a chore, but it's actually a crucial step. Your source really emphasizes that this is where we develop the gluten in the flour.
Gluten, it seems like everyone's talking about gluten these days. So what is it about kneading that makes gluten so important?
Well, think of gluten as a network of proteins. When you knead the dough, you're essentially helping those proteins link together, which creates that strong elastic structure that bread is known for.
So that's why my quick bread recipes, the ones that don't require kneading, always come out so dense. They're lacking that well-developed gluten network. Makes sense. But 8 to 10 minutes of kneading, I'm ready for a workout.
It's a labor of love, but trust me, the results are worth it. Okay, so we've kneaded our dough. We've developed the beautiful gluten structure. Now what?
Now it's time for the dough to take a little nap, right? We're talking about the rise.
Exactly. We need to give those little yeast cells time to do their thing. We've activated them. We've given them food. Now we need to provide the perfect environment for them to work their magic.
So we're talking about placing the dough in a greased bowl, covering it, and putting it in a warm, draft-free place, right? But why all the secrecy? What's so special about this warm and secluded spot?
It's not so much about secrecy. It's about understanding what yeast needs to thrive. And warmth is key. It speeds up the fermentation process, which is what creates all those airy pockets in our bread.
So the yeast is basically having a little party in there.
Exactly. And we want to make sure that party doesn't get interrupted by any cold drafts. Hence, the draft-free environment. Think of it this way. You wouldn't want someone throwing open a window in the middle of a party, would you?
Not unless I was trying to get rid of some guests. Okay, so no open windows, no fans blasting on our dough. But how do we know when the party's over? How do we know when our dough has risen enough?
Your source mentions that the dough should roughly double in size, which usually takes about 1 to 1.5 hours. But there's a fun little test you can do. The poke test. Have you heard of it?
The poke test. Sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
It's pretty simple, actually. You just gently press your finger into the dough. If the indentation slowly springs back, you're good to go.
So if it springs back quickly, that means it needs more time to rise.
Exactly. It means those little yeast cells are still hard at work.
The poke test, I love it. It's like a little secret handshake with your dough.
Okay, so our dough has had its spa treatment. It's nice and puffy. What's the next step in our bread making adventure?
Time to shape our loaves. This is where we get to be a little more hands-on. But before we do that, your source mentions punching down the dough.
Punching it down. That sounds a little aggressive, like our dough owes us money or something. Haha. I know it sounds a bit harsh, but I promise it's not as bad as it sounds. Punching down the dough is really just about gently deflating it. It releases some of the air that's built up during the first rise and helps to even out the temperature.
So it's more of a gentle massage than a knockout punch.
Exactly. We're just helping the dough relax a bit before its second rise. And speaking of shaping, your source talks about both round loaves and using a loaf pan. Is there a right way to do it?
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. Round loaf versus loaf pan. What's the difference?
It really comes down to personal preference. A loaf pan will give you that classic even shape, while shaping a free-form loaf allows for more of a rustic artisan look.
Yeah.
Your source actually has some great visuals and step-by-step instructions for both methods.
I'm already feeling inspired to get my hands dirty. But let's say we've shaped our dough. What happens next? Back to the warm and cozy corner for round 2.
You got it. The dough gets a second rise, but this time it's shorter, usually around 30 to 45 minutes. This one is all about creating the final airy texture before we bake.
Okay, the suspense is killing me here. We're getting close to the baking part, right? Tell me everything. What happens in the oven?
Well, first things first, we need to preheat that oven.
Hmm?
Your source recommends 375 degrees Fahrenheit. But before we bake, there's this cool little step called scoring the dough.
Scoring! Is
Yeah.
that like giving our loaf a grade for how well it's risen so far? A for effort, little loaf.
Uh-huh. Not quite. Scoring is where we get to be bread artists. We're essentially making shallow cuts across the surface of the dough before baking.
Okay, and what's the purpose of that? Is it purely decorative?
It's actually both decorative and functional. Those cuts control how the bread expands in the oven, which prevents any irregular bursts.
So it's like giving the bread some guidelines to follow as it bakes.
Exactly. And it also adds a touch of artistry to our loaves. Speaking of baking, how long are we talking until we reach peak golden brown deliciousness?
So how long are we talking about here? What does the source say about baking time?
About 30 to 35 minutes.
Okay.
But every oven is different, right?
Yeah.
So you really have to rely on visual cues.
Like, what are we looking for specifically?
You want to see that deep golden brown color, and when you tap the bottom of the loaf, it should sound hollow.
Oh, that hollow sound. Yeah, that's how you know it's done. Right.
Exactly.
Okay, so the bread is baked. It's out of the oven. It's filling my kitchen with that amazing aroma. I'm already reaching for the butter. But wait, there's one more step, isn't there? Our source talks about the importance of cooling time.
This is the hardest part.
I know, right? That smell is just torture.
It's pure torture.
So tell me, why is it so crucial to let the bread cool completely before slicing into it?
Patience. Patience. It allows the internal steam to settle, which prevents a gummy texture. Nobody wants gummy bread.
No gummy bread.
Got it.
So we've covered the essential steps of bread making, but our source also throws in some really helpful pro tips along the way. What was your favorite?
Oh, there were so many good ones. But I think the one that stood out to me the most was the tip about brushing the loaf with melted butter right when it comes out of the oven.
Ooh, yes, for that extra gloss and flavor.
Exactly. It's like giving your bread a little spa treatment.
I love it. Okay, so we've talked about the techniques, the tips, but I think one of the most important takeaways from this deep dive is that mastering the basic recipe is just the beginning.
Absolutely. Once you have that foundation, you can let your creativity run wild.
There are so many possibilities.
Right. Different types of flower seeds, herbs. You can even add things like cheese or olives to the dough.
Oh my gosh, cheese bread. Stop, you had me at cheese bread.
The possibilities are truly endless.
You know, I have to say this deep dive has really inspired me to try baking my own bread. It just seems so rewarding.
It is. And your source really captures that feeling of satisfaction that comes from creating something so fundamental with your own two hands.
It's like connecting with something ancient and primal.
Exactly. In a world that's constantly buzzing with distractions, there's something incredibly grounding and satisfying about the entire process of bread making.
It's about slowing down, engaging with simple ingredients, and creating something truly nourishing.
It's about the journey as much as it is about the destination.
I love that. The journey as much as the destination. Well said. So there you have it, folks. A deep dive into the wonderful world of bread making. We've explored the science, the techniques, and even the profound satisfaction that comes with transforming a few humble ingredients into a culinary masterpiece.
We hope this deep dive has inspired you to try baking your own bread and to discover the magic that happens when you combine flour, water, and a little bit of yeast.
And with that, I'm off to go preheat my oven. Happy baking, everyone.